computer. Okay, so Mary, you haven't been here for a little bit, but we are in 2 Samuel, and I think we're on chapter 14.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we saw Samuel and Saul, and now David. He was on his way up, and then he made some bad decisions with Bathsheba. And now his sons made some bad decisions. And we're sort of dealing with the fallout of all of those. Maybe worse than bad decisions, just atrocities, honestly. So last week we dealt with a really difficult topic. It was, we did chapters 13 and 14, where David's son, Ammon, raped his own sister, Tamar. And that laid the seeds for some vengeance and the death of one of his sons. And we're sort of now dealing with the aftermath of that vengeance, I think, in chapter 14. Let's see, it's 33. Do we cut it maybe after like verse 24? Do it in 2 sections?
This is on chapter 14.
Chapter 14. So I guess if someone would like to, maybe I'll start just since.
Sure.
So I'll read 14, 1 through 24, and then get another one here.
Okay.
Absalom returned to Jerusalem. Now Joab, son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's mind was on Absalom. Joab sent to Tekoa and brought from there a wise woman. He said to her, "Pretend to be a mourner, put on mourning garments, do not anoint yourself with oil, but behave like a woman who has been mourning many days for the dead. Go to the king and speak to him as follows." And Joab put the words into her mouth. When the woman of Tekoa came to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and did obeisance and said, "Help, O king." The king asked her, "What is your trouble?" She answered, "Alas, I am a widow. My husband is dead. Your servant had 2 sons, and they fought with one another in the field. There was no one to part them, and one struck the other and killed him. Now the whole family has risen against your servant. They say, 'Give up the man who struck his brother, so that we may kill him for the life of his brother whom he murdered, even if we destroy the heir as well.' Thus they would quench my one remaining ember, and leave to my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth." Then the king said to the woman, "Go to your house. I will give orders concerning you." The woman of Tekoa said to the king, "On me be the guilt, my lord and king, and on my father's house. Let the king and his throne be guiltless." The king said, "If anyone says anything to you, bring him to me, and he shall never touch you again." Then she said, "Please, may the king keep the Lord your God in mind, so that the avenger of blood may kill no more, and my son not be destroyed." He said, "As the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground." Then the woman said, "Please let your servant speak a word to my lord the king." He said, "Speak." The woman said, "Why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in giving this decision, the king convicts himself, inasmuch as the king does not bring his banished one home again. We must all die. We are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up. But God will not take away a life. He will devise plans so as not to keep an outcast banished forever from his presence. Now I have come to say this to my lord the king, because the people have made me afraid." Your servant thought, "I will speak to the king. It may be that the king will perform the request of his servant. For the king will hear and deliver his servant from the hand of the man who would cut both me and my son off from the heritage of God." Your servant thought, "The word of my lord the king will set me at rest. For my lord the king is like the angel of God, discerning good and evil. The Lord your God be with you." Then the king answered the woman, "Do not withhold from me anything I ask you." And the woman said, "Let my lord king speak." The king said, "Is this the hand of Joab with you in all this?" The woman answered and said, "As surely as you live, my lord the king, one cannot turn right or left from anything that my lord the king has said. For it was your servant Joab who commanded me. It was he who put all these words into the mouth of your servant. In order to change the course of affairs, your servant Joab did this. But my lord has wisdom, like the wisdom of the angel of God, to know all things that are on the earth." Then the king said to Joab, "Very well, I grant this. Go bring back the young man Absalom." Joab prostrated himself with his face to the ground and did obeisance and blessed the king. And Joab said, "Today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, my lord the king, and that the king has granted the request of his servant." So Joab set off, went to Geshur, and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. The king said, "Let him go to his own house. He is not to come into my presence." So Absalom went to his own house and did not come into the king's presence. That was very wordy and long-winded.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to unpack that a little bit.
So Joab was involved in Absalom's plot, was he not?
Right, he's kind of behind the scenes
Right.
and setting up.
Is he the one that Absalom instructed basically to make sure that the brother was there and then instruct the others to kill him? Was it Joab? Did
No,
Absalom ask to do that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yes, in an earlier chapter, we read that where he told them to make sure you're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was Joab.
So in other words, this old woman was being used to simply present the same exact scenario that Absalom, Amnon, and David had all been involved in.
Right,
And David would rule favorably in her regard. So then she turned it around and
and
turned it back on
he'd
David.
be a hypocrite if he wouldn't bring his own
Right.
son home.
Okay,
So, and just so I'm remembering right, which I may not be, Absalom killed Amnon, right?
Right.
So Amnon raped Tamar.
mhm,
Absalom was like, "That's not a good thing to do to my sister."
mhm,
He ended up killing Amnon in revenge.
mhm.
And we talked last week for, I guess maybe everyone was here but Mary, but just so I remember, part of this was that David took no act himself against his son for raping his
Yeah.
sister.
Yeah.
And so there was this sort of lack of justice.
Right.
So the Amnon and Absalom are hard names for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Absalom killed Amnon, but then Absalom flees because he's
Correct.
worried David's gonna be
Right.
upset for killing the son. Yeah,
And then it
This
turned
is
out
tricky.
that David actually was grieving the loss of Absalom more than he was grieving the death of Amnon. Because
Right.
wasn't Absalom his favorite son at that point?
yeah, and they said that as time went by, he got over mourning for the son who was dead.
But
and
he was
started
still mourning.
missing.
Right, Absalom.
So now I don't know how he picked Tekoa, this woman, or what.
Yeah,
I don't know.
why she plays a role.
Is there any blurb from her in the woman's Bible?
No, that's all.
That's the thing. She's just suddenly
No, I
thrown
don't-
in there. We don't even know who she
I
is.
don't have
Just
that.
a wise woman, or a gifted woman is what my translation says.
Mm-hmm.
My footnote says a wise woman would be a woman skilled in rhetoric.
Okay,
So maybe just someone who
somebody who could
speak
put the
well,
words correctly to influence the king.
to like weave on this little tale that
Right.
ends up being kind of about
Right,
himself.
right. But again, my overwhelming thought from last week especially was that really David didn't have a leg to stand on in terms of making a proper judgment about raping a woman. I mean,
Right.
since that's essentially what he did to Bathsheba. and, you know, everybody knew about it. So,
Right.
hmm.
Here's just a little.
Oh, good.
After avenging his sister in the murder of Amnon, Absalom becomes a fugitive. This chapter tells how Absalom's estrangement from his father gets resolved and notes Joab's critical role in the process. Through her persuasive ruse, the wise woman of Tekoa reminds the king of the peril of losing two of his oldest sons in his banishment of Absalom does not end. If his banishment of Absalom does not end, that it takes 2 years in Jerusalem and an act of arson for Absalom to get permission to appear before his father suggests David's stubborn refusal to be fully reconciled with him. Once again, the personal and political, I think I'm doing you're gonna find out a cliff note early on. Once again, the personal and political costliness of David's delay in dealing with his children soon become apparent. In the midst of her speech to the king, the wise woman captures the way mortality looms over this royal family drama. We all have to die, she says. We're like water spilled out on the ground that can't be gathered up again. It's a vivid reminder of the urgency of seeking reconciliation with those we love.
That's a nice message for Ash Wednesday too,
Mm,
isn't it? It's a beautiful image.
that's right. You don't, yeah. Reconciliation with those we love.
I have a note too here in, I think it's the Woman's Bible that I'm reading. Shame is an emotion that's often related to trauma. In 2 Samuel, this passage, we see the pain of rape, the abuse of power, and the weight of shame in the silencing of Tamar. The passage begins with a clear framing of Tamar as a servant and Amnon as a person with power in the relationship. Amnon raped Tamar, blaming it first on his lust, but that lust immediately turned to loathing when the rape was complete, clarifying that this act was about power, not about desire. Amnon was David's son and Tamar was David's daughter. David refused to punish Amnon because he loved him as his oldest child. This demonstrates the power of the patriarchy to protect and value men, not women, creating a corrupt system of justice. Tamar left the situation further disempowered with ashes, showing her mourning. She carried the shame of her rape and suffered loss in the face of male patriarchy. Rape victims often share their experience, that their experience silenced them and caused them to mourn as if something about them had died. How might we give voice to such biblical passages in a way that creates healing for women and men who experience rape?
Oh,
Yeah.
a nice note.
Yeah. And it's kind of a reminder also how so much of shame and guilt is the result of the cultural things that we inculcate and the religious laws and the shame, you know, we internalize that, you know. How many Black people have internalized racism? How many gay people have internalized homophobia because of the culture that has shame? We shame ourselves because we are being shamed by all those that we care about, and you know, our surrounding cultural, you know, culture from the big picture right down to the family,
Right.
you know. And yes, the whole patriarchy thing and the misogyny thing and the whole notion that Tamar was just somebody's piece of chattel, and that now she wasn't worth anything.
Right.
She could no longer be a political pawn or anything like that, you know.
Yeah.
But it's really, it is a shame that that kind of thing is inflicted on all of us to some degree, some more than others.
Well, and I think this is too how it just keeps cycling through, you know, now 2 Samuel, how many kings have we gone through? And all the families, and it just, all of that injustice doesn't stop. If David overlooks if David does something wrong, then his sons are doing things wrong. when he overlooks that, that injustice leads to, it just keeps going.
Mhm. Well, and that very culture was almost promoting it, you know, David was never punished
No,
by the
No.
culture for these crimes against humanity. And this was the culture that was seeing this as God's will working out, you know, God's will working out through monstrous people.
right. And then he had all the battle victories after
Mhm,
Bathsheba,
mhm.
and Bathsheba's son died. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's sometimes hard to say David's punishment was Bathsheba's son dying, because like we
Yes.
talked about, then Bathsheba is just nobody.
Mhm.
yeah.
She's not someone who was raped. She's not someone who lost her husband. She's not someone who lost a child.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's, yeah. It's tough.
Mhm.
It's interesting though to go back and fill in these, for me, it's interesting to go back and try to fill in these voices that are missing.
Mhm. But you know, for me, you know, trying to make connections then between human thought and practice and human interaction as recorded 4,000 years ago, and making the connection to what we can see going on in our own lives, in our own
Mhm.
country, in our own neighborhoods, you know, it's like 4,000 years later, things aren't any
Yeah, I was
better.
gonna say, they haven't
really.
really changed that much, have they?
No, it's you know, it would be nice to see some tangible salvation,
Mm.
which, you know, there are obviously, and I'm not a negative person,
Yeah.
because there are, you know, wonderful things, but still, it's just really interesting to say, oh yeah, that just happened in the news yesterday, you know,
Mhm.
this, you know.
Well, I guess one thing I feel comforted by is that there is a woman's Bible,
Mhm.
and there are places that, I mean, these ideas couldn't even have been surfaced maybe then. Certainly not written down and published, and
Even 40 or 50 years ago. You know, you just remember the huge kerfuffle about the Equal Rights Amendment,
Mhm.
and how that just brought to the surface this whole thing that women had to be kept in their places, and this is ridiculous. Why would we even think about doing this? You know, it just,
that hasn't gone anywhere.
no,
But
no, not as, not in that incarnation anyway. Yeah. Huh.
um so
We
we've got
would pick up.
Absalom, yeah, we've got Absalom back now, but David won't see him.
Mhm.
And then my heading for verses 25 to the end of the chapter is David forgives Absalom. So it looks like somehow they're gonna get back together. But would anyone like to read just 25 through the end of 14?
Yeah, sure.
Oh,
I can
thanks,
do
Fran.
that. Okay. In all Israel, there was not a man who could be praised for his beauty as Absalom, who was without blemish from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. When he shaved his head, which he used to do at the end of every year because his hair became too heavy for him, the hair weighed 200 shekels according to the royal standard. He was a hairy guy. Absalom had 3 sons born to him, besides a daughter named Tamar, who was a beautiful woman. Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years without appearing before the king. Then he summoned Joab to send him to the king, but Joab would not come to him. Although he summoned him a second time, Joab refused to come. He therefore instructed his servants, "You see Joab's field that borders mine, on which he has barley. Go set it on fire." And so Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Joab's farmhands came to him with torn garments and reported to him what had been done. At this, Joab went to Absalom in his house and asked him, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" Absalom answered Joab, "I was summoning you to come here, that I may send you to the king to say, why did I come back from Geshur? I would be better off if I were still there. Now let me appear before the king. If I am guilty, let him put me to death." Joab went to the king and reported this. The king then called Absalom, who came to him, and in homage fell on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed him.
So is the kiss the sign of all is forgiven?
I think so.
Evidently.
So arson pays off.
Yeah. Well, and I think
That's
a
confusing.
sign of joy and, you know, David's own feelings, you know.
Mhm.
Cause he hasn't seen him at all.
This is almost a
sense of-
prodigal son
I was
foreshadowing.
just thinking that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Also would remind me of, fulfilling prophecies that happen when the New Testament refers back to these things. And in the New Testament, Christ is betrayed by a kiss.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else have thoughts? Okay.
My thoughts are, oh my gosh, what did I miss? This is horrible.
The whole thing, Mary, which relationship is distressing?
Well, no, I mean,
What we've read
the
so far.
actions that are happening now are more dramatic and seem, to me, they seem more, well, violent. And, I guess I didn't see the progress of it coming to this
Mm.
because I wasn't here and I didn't read it.
Well, I was here and read it, but I didn't see it.
I didn't think it coming.
It's just such a long story from David fighting Goliath
Mm-hmm.
and then being in exile, working as a mercenary, then coming back and fighting a
Yeah.
war, and then Saul dying, David eventually uniting
Mm-hmm.
the tribes of Israel, then like having this problem with Bathsheba.
Mhm.
It's just there's been a lot. There's a lot.
Mhm.
If David Schilling was here, he would remind us that this is written as sort of a promotion of David
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
while they were in exile.
Mhm.
So can anybody, like, I know it said 2 years.
Mhm.
And then, so this whole time period, in terms of when we first started learning about David, does anybody can you give, is this a 50 years? Yeah, like, what, timeline?
Time frame.
It can't, it didn't happen like,
Oh,
Well, it said he stayed in Gesher when he fled after
Correct.
killing
Okay,
for 3
correct.
years.
but
And then now
from the
2.
really, okay, but
From-
the start of this whole thing with David, are we looking at
But like from when he was like little boy,
like
Goliath,
David and
David?
Goliath, and then what?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know, but I would assume that he'd probably have to be, probably by this time with all the children and whatnot that he had, he must be, maybe approaching middle age, maybe 35 or 40. I
Okay.
don't know.
Yeah, 40, but
Yeah.
I think that's just the guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they're not specific,
No,
but
I
you get
know,
the
but
feeling
just-
that David's been around for a while
Yes.
and, has, all these battles and stuff that we've read about, but,
So clearly it didn't happen overnight. This has been a process that's been going on. The only time that, we just have the 3-year indicated, but it's been, you're right. If he's had babies and now he has older sons, that in itself says it could be, I don't know, 30-ish
Yeah.
years.
I don't know.
Ballpark.
Another thought occurred to me, is that David's first 2 wives, and he may have had more than 2 by this time, by the time of Bathsheba, who knows? But we know that he already had 2. His first one, what was her name? Michal or something?
Yes.
Saul's
Yes.
daughter.
Yes,
Yes.
the one who got taken away. and
Away
put him
from
back.
the, yep.
And then then a second one was mentioned, but neither of these women were mentioned within the context of David raping Bathsheba.
Right.
Right,
They're voiceless.
yes.
Their concern about the whole situation was not broached at all. Or the effect that it might have ultimately on kids and all that kind of stuff. It just, it's interesting to me that those voices are not present.
Yeah.
And, actually, this is kind of getting into the theme of the book that we're doing for Adult Forum now,
Right.
this book about silence. These women were silent,
Mm-hmm.
at least in terms of the people who were writing this, which almost implies that their voice had no value. Or, in terms of that situation.
Mhm.
Not something they wanted to put down as part of the
Yeah,
story, right?
right.
I just looked up a timeline of David's life,
Mhm.
Well, thank you.
my friend Google. So they have him marrying Bathsheba at about age 45.
Oh, okay.
They have him being made king of Judah at about 30.
Mm-hmm.
They're having him kill Goliath in his late teens, being,
Yes.
you know, David played the chord that pleased the Lord, being the
Mhm.
lyricist. They have that about 20.
Okay.
30 made king, and then of Judah. And then about 37, 38, that's when he sort of united
Mhm.
Israel after he conquered Jerusalem. And then Bathsheba is about 5, 6 years later.
Okay.
So his unification of the tribes actually, at least partially, was due to military conquests,
I think that's,
not just a kumbaya moment.
I
Yeah.
have to go back and
Yes.
look, but,
Almost
Google
everything
says that he was
right.
30 when he became king and ruled for about 40 years. He was 70
yeah, mine has that.
at the end of his reign.
30 years old, made king of Judah. And then after married Bathsheba, there's some other things happening that we'll probably get to. Solomon born, Solomon becoming
Mhm.
king, David
Mhm.
dying. So he did a lot.
Yeah.
He really packed a lot into his years.
Very
Like,
true.
who's he gonna take over next?
And how often have we seen this scenario depicted in various books, movies, whatever, you know, middle-aged man is having middle-age crisis and goes after a much younger woman to revitalize himself,
Yes.
so to speak.
Parallels with.
Society today.
It's,
Right off the top.
yeah, it's like, you know, evidently the zest was
And
gone from
sometimes
his
it's
first several
multiples.
marriages.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's multiples young ones.
Yeah.
They just keep each
Yeah.
getting younger.
Yeah.
Well, and also the powerful man having sons who go off the rails.
Yes.
The
Mhm.
whole sort of fail son
Right,
phenomenon is still pretty
Right.
prevalent, I think.
Yeah, but again, the example that David set for his sons, I mean, how
Yeah.
could he then castigate his sons for acting in the same
Do the
manner
same
that
thing
he's
he's
done?
doing.
You know,
Well, it's kind of like they're his kids, they're not supposed to do it. I just remember having a student that, well, let's put it this way, she gave me lots of trials. And at a parent-teacher conference one, back to school night
Mhm.
thing, this woman comes up to me and it's like, geez, she looks familiar, but I can't place her. That's who it was. And her words to me was, if my daughter ever tries what I did, let me know.
wow.
So, I think it's one of those kind of things.
Mhm. It is, yeah.
It's pretty
that-
sad
that's
when you
funny.
start getting your kids.
I
kids
know.
too.
You know, it's hungry.
Yeah,
Excuse
that's when
me,
you know.
I did, that happened to me several times. The first time it did, it was like, it just.
I know.
And then you see the same behaviors that they exhibited when they were.
And now the
Oh.
original students have grandkids. I
Wow.
have former students who are grandparents.
Oh, yeah, my husband has a lot, he had a lot of
He was a
that.
teacher as well?
He was a teacher, yeah.
Oh,
Mhm. And he had a lot of that.
Oh.
this sounds like a coffee hour discussion,
Yeah.
but I would like to explore that with you sometime.
Actually, one of his former students ended up on the board.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Shall we take a stab at 15?
You want me to read from the message?
I would love that.
Yeah.
Okay. As time went on, Absalom took to riding in a horse-drawn chariot with 50 men running in front of him. Early each morning, he would take up his post beside the road at the city gate. When anyone showed up with a case to bring to the king for a decision, Absalom would call him over and say, "Where do you hail from?" And the answer would come, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say, "Look, you've got a strong case, but the king isn't going to listen to you." Then he'd say, "Why doesn't someone make me a judge for this country? Anybody with a case could bring it to me and I'd settle things fair and square." When someone would treat him with special honor, he'd shrug it off and treat him like an equal, making him feel important. Absalom did this to everyone who came to do business with the king and stole the hearts of everyone in Israel. After 4 years of this, Absalom spoke to the king. Let me go to Hebron to pay a vow that I made to God. Your servant made a vow when I was living in Geshur in Aram, saying, if God will bring me back to Jerusalem, I'll serve him with my life. The king said, go with my blessing. And he got up and set off for Hebron. Then Absalom sent undercover agents to all the tribes of Israel with the message, when you hear the blast of the ram's horn trumpet, that's your signal. Shout, Absalom is king in Hebron. 200 men went with Absalom from Jerusalem, but they had been called together knowing nothing of the plot and made the trip innocently. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he managed also to involve Athriel, the Galanite, David's advisor, calling him away with his hometown of Gilgal. The conspiracy grew powerful and Absalom's supporters multiplied. Someone came to David with the report, the whole country is taken up with Absalom. Up and out of here, called David to all his servants who were with him in Jerusalem. We've got to run for our lives, or none of us will escape Absalom. Hurry, pull the city down around our ears and slaughter us all. The king's servant said, whatever our master, the king says, we'll do. We're with you all the way. So the king and his entire household escaped on foot. The king left 10 concubines behind to tend to the palace. And so they left step by step by step, and then paused at the last house as the whole army passed by. All the Kerethites, all the Pelethites, and 600 Gittites who had marched with them from Gath went past. The king called out to Ittai, the Gittite, what are you doing here? Go back with King Absalom. You're a stranger here and freshly uprooted from your own country. You arrived only yesterday, and I'm going to let you take your chances with us as I live on the road like a gypsy. Go back and take your family with you, and God's grace and truth go with you. But Ittai answered, as God lives and my master the king lives, where my master is, that's where I'll be, whether it means life or death. All right, said David, go ahead. And they went on, Ittai the Gittite, with all his men and all the children he had with him. The whole country was weeping in loud lament as all the people passed by. As the king crossed the brook Kidron, the army headed for the road to the wilderness. Zadok was also there, the Levites with him, carrying God's chest of the covenant. They set the chest of God down, Abiathar standing by until all the people had evacuated the city. Wow. Then the king ordered Zadok, take the chest back to the city. If I get back in God's good graces, he'll bring me back and show me where the chest has been set down. But if he says, I'm not pleased with you, well, he can then do with me whatever he pleases. The king directed Zadok, the priest, here's the plan. Return to the city peacefully with Aramaz, your son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, with you. I'll wait at the spot in the wilderness across the river until I get word from telling you what's up. So Zadok and Abiathar took the chest of God back to Jerusalem and placed it there, while David went up to the Mount of Olives, weeping, head covered but barefoot, and the whole army was with him, heads covered and weeping as they ascended. David was told, Ahithophel has joined the conspirators with Absalom. He prayed, oh God, turn Ahithophel's counsel to foolishness. As David approached the top of the hill where God was worshipped, Hushai, the Archite, clothes ripped to shreds and dirt on his head, was there waiting for him. David said, if you come with me, you'll be just one more piece of luggage. Go back to the city and say to Absalom, I'm ready to be your servant, O king. I used to be your father's servant. Now I'm your servant. Do that and you'll be able to confuse Abithal's counsel for me. The priests Zadok and Abiathar are already there. Whatever information you pick up in the palace, tell them. Their two sons, Zadok and Amazad, and Abiathar's son Jonathan are there with them. Anything you pick up, can be sent to me by them. Hushar, David's friend, arrived at the same time Absalom was entering Jerusalem.
Wow, I'm sorry, I butchered all
No,
those
you're doing
names.
great.
Easy. That's how I end.
Wow.
So in other words, David is planting a spy
Yeah.
Sounds like
in the
it, yeah.
city, okay.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I only feel good about that because it says Hushai becomes David's spy. And
Oh, okay.
so I feel good. I feel good about that one. So
Couple of these were kind of.
David and
humorous.
Absalom have kind of a tough relationship.
Hmm.
He just was laying on the ground and David kissed him after his little bout with arson. But now
Mhm.
he's kind of taken over.
Mhm.
Yep, Mary, I'm sorry, you started to say you got some.
No, I just thought some of it was kind of humorous. The men running in front of the chariot. Like, I think they'd be trying to keep up behind. And then, mine says that he would be a burden to him. If you
Yeah.
go with me, you will be a burden. I thought that was a little humorous too. But.
I like the secret agents. Mine says
That was
secret
Diane.
messengers. But he's going to send them all and then they're all supposed to just shout,
yeah.
he should be the king. And that's how it works.
Right.
But
So was Hebron, was that a part of the kingdom that David actually ruled over and Absalom was kind of usurping
that is how
that
I'm.
piece
reading
of the overall
that's-
kingdom?
I mean, that's the way I understood it.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's right,
Okay.
you know. But since three of us read it that way,
Yeah, that's what I think.
it's Diane.
Oh,
Oh, that's right.
I'm at Bible study right now, Diane. Yeah, okay, all right, okay.
Is that our Diane?
Yeah, our Diane, she's
Oh.
like, oh, I missed Bible study.
She was here till
But she's
late.
coming at 12.
oh, for the service, yeah.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay.
It says Hebron was the traditional capital of Judah. And
Yeah.
since David took Judah first
Mhm.
and then kind of united the rest of Israel.
Okay.
I feel like Hebron would have to be
Okay.
part of David's kingdom.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm reading that right, but
Sounds right to me.
And then there were all these Kerethites and Pelethites and 600 men from Gath.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, were these people that were supposedly part of David's kingdom, or were these still like little kingdoms of their own?
it says
The
Gath
Keret-
was Philistine city.
Okay,
So
Oh,
that wouldn't have
okay.
been part
No.
of it.
No.
so they were
no.
just kind of mercenaries or people who were siding with Absalom in order to possibly win favor,
Mhm.
if in fact he took over, if he conquered David's lands.
Yeah, maybe they just
Mhm.
didn't like David.
Yeah, well,
enemy
well,
of the
the
enemy.
Philistines had a good reason to
Wait.
not like David much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But maybe they thought they could get in with Absalom
right.
and
Mhm. To help him
help him.
conquer David's
Mhm.
kingdom, and thus they would be, rewarded for that, maybe.
Mhm.
Mhm. It is interesting how these translations are so different, because the Message thing said that Absalom had a chariot. This one said, after this, Absalom provided himself with chariots, horses, and 50 henchmen,
Oh.
which almost implies to me that all these other henchmen are going to be in chariots,
Yeah.
which is a lot
Running.
scarier looking than one chariot coming in,
50-minute chariot.
running for their lives. But, yeah.
It's a very ostentatious image, right?
Mhm.
That he's
Right.
like all these men are running with him.
Right.
And it's making me think of Aladdin, like when Prince Ali goes into the city.
Uh-huh.
And
When I
then
just-
him being like,
my mind is just all the chariot races and all the old movies
movie,
and stuff, you know, and it's like, you know, the white horse won and the black horse didn't. But yeah, 50 chariots, that's much better than 50 men running.
You know what, I misspoke, because these chairs I can colorify. Yeah. So David was escaping. When he fled Jerusalem, so they weren't with Absalom.
All of a sudden, the sound has dropped quite a bit, Charity.
Yeah,
Sure. What to do about that?
Well, weren't they used to trotting out the ark?
Any better?
I got you.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Wasn't it the custom to trot out the ark?
Yes.
That way you would be victorious.
symbol.
You were being
Yeah.
protected by God.
So Zadok and the other priests brought it along with David
Right.
in order to maybe turn the tide against Absalom. But then I wonder why David would take it back to the city.
And then he says something like, I can find it. It's
Oh.
like if he still favors me, he'll bring me back and let me see it and
Yes,
the place
and
where
maybe
I
where the
stay.
test-
Does that mean he'll survive his battles and come back? Because
yeah.
at first I sort of thought it was like a we've hidden this, like he's got to go hot or colder through the city. But it just means he'll survive to come back and see it again. Okay.
Or,
Well-
or maybe he didn't want to risk losing it in Absalom's victory, if in fact
Yes.
Absalom were victorious.
Thing is,
Because remember, they lost to the Philistines,
Right.
and it was in
So maybe he's
Philistine
protecting.
captivity.
he's
as well.
protecting, and the other thing is too, David's fleeing, so that would be an obvious sign of where David is. So, you know, it could be another thing, protecting, but yet doesn't want to give where he's at away. So get this ark out of here, so they don't know where I'm at.
And it doesn't, it actually, David's household and then all these other hangers on, it doesn't say anything about David's army, so probably Jerusalem is left protected. Safe.
Exactly, yeah.
It's interesting that, David was really whatever.
And to flee is
Mhm.
really not a sign of strength.
No.
No, it's kind of like,
And he's the king,
yeah,
so
But it's interesting though, because Absalom and his forces were in Hebron, so why would David necessarily flee Jerusalem unless there were people there that were on Absalom's side and,
Yeah.
Maybe
might
they
have been a
had
danger
infiltrated
also, an
and so he
internal
wanted to get
danger,
out,
I don't
yeah.
know.
right, yeah.
it sounds like they're sort of fomenting civil unrest,
Mhm.
right? And they're like whispering in people's ears and building this
Mhm.
movement.
I also found it interesting because if you'll recall back when David was being described, he was like the most handsome man in the land and
Yes.
hair of bronze. And blah, blah, blah. So then now comes Absalom, and now Absalom is the fairest man in the land, basically is what it was saying.
With very heavy hair.
With
Yeah.
very heavy hair.
Lots of hair and it was heavy.
Right, but I find that interesting that these people, that somehow physical beauty was linked to their popular support and people's view of them as leaders.
But
Yeah.
look at what we have today in
Oh, I know.
politics. I mean, the most charismatic person
Yeah.
is probably gonna win.
Well, we talk about people looking presidential.
Right.
Right.
Being
Mhm.
6
Now,
foot tall.
well, in
and
Chicago,
white
they're
boy.
trying to look like a mayor.
Square jawline, cleft.
Hopefully.
Anyway,
Boundary.
it's interesting to me because when I was a freshman in high school, I loved my English teacher. She was great. And her husband worked for the biggest bank in Kansas City. And she said, this is a completely unwritten law, but this bank will only hire incredibly handsome people. You could be a Wall Street wizard, but if you were homely or overweight or whatever,
Yeah.
you won't get hired.
Yeah.
they wanted the face of their company to look like everyone like, you know, TV
Mhm.
newscasters.
Mhm.
And that whole thing still happens.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think you see that in some, I
Sure.
mean, it's probably, it's an unwritten policy, but you can see it in the people that are employed there.
Right. But why a person's physical appearance would alter their credibility for something that they're so obviously
Mhm.
really good at?
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
did you ever see the book or read the book or see the movie Moneyball? It was about baseball teams and it was
Yes.
Oakland didn't have a lot of money, so they started looking at statistics. Like, are there people who would help our team,
Mhm.
but we're overlooking them? And one of the things they kept saying was the scouts would say he has a jaw for baseball. And they were picking people on the team based on his face. He has the right face.
Right.
And when you started like not looking at the people, but looking at the statistics,
Mhm.
that's how like the Oakland
Mhm.
A's built
Mhm.
like they didn't win the World Series, but they did a really good job. That's a movie about that.
Mhm.
But I
Oh.
think it's been around a long
What was the
time.
name of it?
Moneyball.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
that
was-
was that one.
I read the book. I didn't see
Yeah,
it.
Moneyball. Was that the one that Cuba Gooding Jr. was in and Jonah Hill?
See, we're missing Greg. He can tell you.
Yeah.
He were.
I don't see him up there, maybe he's up there.
Jonah Hill. Yes, yeah. Yeah, wasn't that the one where he said, "Show me the money, show me the money"?
Oh,
with
no,
Cuba
well,
Gooding Jr. Was that the
That
one?
you're getting too confused.
Okay,
Yeah, there's too many.
conflating.
Jerry Maguire.
Oh, Jerry
Yes,
Maguire.
yeah.
Right.
Listening to
Right.
this recording.
Yeah.
I'm just saying
Yeah,
that when they describe Absalom or David as
Right.
incredibly good looking,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that they are reflecting something that still exists culturally,
Right.
that someone's appearance can be used to infer their competence
Yep.
or their
Incompetence.
incompetence.
Right. And they
Yeah.
specifically mentioned David's stature, about how he stood above other men. It didn't say that, perhaps maybe that was true too, since he was in the same gene pool, but,
Yeah.
you know.
He was
anyway.
just pretty.
Yeah.
He was so pretty with 6-pound hair. I looked my footnote and it says about 6
Oh,
pounds.
it's,
200 shekels should be about 6 pounds.
oh, okay.
Oh,
The Children Living says 3.
well, that's okay, even that.
Anyway.
Yeah.
A lot of hair.
Well, it's about 11:30.
Good stuff.
We covered a lot of ground.
Well, take care, all. Bye.
Bye.
Silence. I think, and I'm going to be reading this now, you know,
Yeah, when's that
based
going?